Good, good. All right, well, we're going to get started this morning with our inspiration talk. So I'll start out with a quick prayer. Dear God, thanks for this time together. Thanks for these relationships and experiences you give us. Please help us to understand what's going on in this world, but be able to live in a way that we can be brave and courageous in the midst of these fears. We're thankful for these opportunities. We're thankful for these experiences, and we know that they're all a gift. Amen. All right. So today, anybody a fan of Star Wars?
Hey,
Today is Star Wars Day, May the 4th. So may the Force be with you guys. And that's our talk today. So we had talked. We're continuing on this idea of these four C's that we had talked about a couple weeks ago. From deciding to go into them in more detail, and we're going to start out today in tribute to Star Wars, talking about Lando, one of the characters from Star Wars. So Lando was he had quite the handle for a name here. You can read it there. Baron Landis Balthazar Lando Calrissian III. But he was a friend of Han Solo's in the 1980 Empire Strikes Back movie. And prior to the film, the story went that he was a gambler, a con artist, playboy, a mining engineer, and a businessman. And he was also the owner of the Millennium Falcon until he lost the ship to Han Solo in a bet. And the whole question was it maybe wasn't an honest bet. So there's this whole frenemy type of thing between Han Solo and Lando that came out in the film. But then later he became a baron or the administrator of some city, made-up city in Star Wars. And then he reluctantly betrayed Han Solo to Darth Vader, and then he later rescues Hans from Jabba the Hutt and becomes a general in the rebellion army. And then later, 39 years later, he's back in the films again as kind of a guy that helps save things. So today in our stories, I think about kind of this competition and these stories that was written for Lando opposed to Han Solo, and the competition between the two of them and how they interacted. So the four C's we were talking about were comparison, which we talked in more detail about last week, competition, contentment, and complacency. As I said, they're not exhaustive. Competition was defined as a situation in which someone is trying to win something or be more successful than someone else. Beware of defining how we define winning in our terms. In other words, what is our success? What does it mean to be winning, if you will? Is my success the same as what your success would be? And that we think about, would you judge me based on whether or not I had ever owned the Millennium Falcon? And if I did, would that be successful? Or would you judge Lando based on if he has ever designed a stream, and would he be successful if he designed a stream or not? And of course that's silly, because Lando would never design a stream, and I would never own the Millennium Falcon, because Millennium Falcon is not real, and Lando is not real to design a stream. Therefore, that would not make sense. But we oftentimes end up putting money as kind of the great equal idea for what is success. So we decide somebody's successful or not by some sort of monetary standards. And with that, we talked about love and compassion through experiences and relationships as the basis of its success, based on Christ's understanding and sharing of us of what it means to be victorious and successful. So everybody has a different plan. There's a different plan for everybody in life, and it's all unique. So for us to compare ourselves against others is odd, as we talked about last week, when there's different plans, but also to have competition in that is different. So we talk about friendly competition. And there's no room for competition in love. And what that means is that competition is always about comparing ourselves versus somebody else, or trying to say, hey, we're going to do this. If I do this, then then you can do that. It's kind of a list. It's that idea of, well, you know, um, if I was to go to Abby and say, Abby, well, if I change 2 diapers, will you change the 3rd or 4th diaper? And that might be fair, but it's a competition. It's like, hey, I've changed 4 today. You've only changed 1 diaper, or you've changed 4 today, and I've only changed 1 diaper. You can see where we're kind of in the midst of right now. But 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 13 said, love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous. When we think about competition, we never think of competition as being patient. We never think of competition as being kind or not being jealous. In general, competition is all about being jealous. It's about not being patient. It's about being the quickest to kind of score, the quickest to be able to do whatever it is we're trying to do. Love does not brag. It's not arrogant. We think about competition. Competition generally does brag. It is arrogant. I have a lot of fun with competition, but I can always think of, I'll play cards. Growing up, my cousins and I used to play a lot of pinochle together, cards, and we played poker and some other things too, but we always liked playing pinochle. But the best part about playing pinochle was not so much playing the card games as the trash talk that we'd have related to playing the card games. So we'd be bragging about it, and we'd be arrogant, and we'd just be talking smack on each other. And that was kind of the fun part about playing. Love does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked. It does not take account of wrong suffered. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in truth. It bears all, it believes all, it hopes all, and endures all things. Love never fails, but if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away with, or the gifts of tongues, they will cease. And what we learn through this passage is kind of what love's like, and what we see as a sharp contrast to love is kind of how we deal in competition to others. I challenge is, to use this in a relationship. If you're struggling in a relationship, pull this verse out, 1 Corinthians 13:4. And if you don't remember it, just say the love verse, type it into Google, and you'll find it. And just try to put your name in there. And if you're in competition with a friend, with a spouse, with a coworker, see if you could put your name in these situations. And usually when you're convicted and say, Dave is patient, and you'll be like, oh, I'm really not patient in this situation. Maybe that's what I need to work on more to try to get through the situation I'm having of conflict with somebody else. So this idea of competition kind of brings up an idea of a combatant. A combatant is a person or a nation engaged in fighting during a war, but it's also a person engaged in conflict or competition with another. And in general, we use the word combatant. We think of combatant as being more of, I have a picture of World War I trench warfare, and combatants jumping over the trench and with their guns and their and just kind of combatants in war. But also, kids playing a board game. You don't think of them as being combatants, but this idea, the definition of a combatant really is conflict or competition with others, whether it's a board game to try to conquer the world, or whether it's actually trying to conquer the world. So what I would ask you today is, who are you in competition with? Are you in competition with others? Are these others you're in competition with, are they friends? Do I value, in being in competition with others? A lot of times our competition with friends are being valuing being right. In my opinion of the law, or my opinion of what's right, do I value that more than being kind towards others? So, a diagram that I saw today that I liked, in thinking about value in my opinion of the law, I think of the Pharisees from the Bible. They were so stuck on 613 legal laws that they had to uphold in the Torah or the Jewish religion at the time, that they would basically close themselves and become disengaged with others because of the judgmental and legalistic negative ideas of how people had to be, because they weren't upholding these laws. So they had these opinions of how people had to be, and they were more concerned about being right than being kind towards others. You know, when Jesus came as a Jew, he said, hey, you know what? It's more about being in a relationship with the people. And instead of setting the sinners apart, I want the sinners to kind of come to me and be in a relationship with me. And it's more about an open and engaging idea of loving others, opposed to don't do this, do that. And it wasn't about having a list of do's and don'ts or debits and credits, if you will. It was more about this relationship that Jesus came to have with us. The other thing about with friends is, am I trying to keep track of these rights and wrongs? You know, so I think of, you know, having a balance sheet and a calendar or something, and you're always trying to keep track of how much money you have coming in, your debits or credits, in mitigation bank, and how many debits do I have, how many credits do I have. But do we live our lives that way? I remember one of my close friends told me about how they live their life, and they're like, well, you know, I do something nice for somebody, but I keep track of it, and if they don't do things nice to me, well, I'm not going to do another thing nice to them in the future. And it was scary to me at the time. I was like, it just be so painful to keep track of rights and wrongs for everything. What 1 Corinthians 13 says is love keeps no track of wrongs, but with that as a digital type of approach, keeping track of a right is about the same as keeping track of a wrong. If you say, well, these people did a lot of rights for me, so I need to do another good thing towards them because they did enough good things towards me, that's really still a competition with others. I've known a lot of people that will not accept, and I've spent time in this, I won't accept things from people because I want to do something nice for somebody else. I'm too afraid to accept something from somebody else. But love breaks down when we don't allow people to do kind things towards us, as well as love breaks down when we do evil things towards people. So sometimes it's us allowing people to show love towards us. This term frenemies came up and related to competitions. I think it's kind of neat. It's 1953 invention of a journalist, and basically we're talking about U.S.-Russian Cold War relations. You know, so my picture there's Reagan and Gorbachev in the 80s, related to kind of the Soviet-U.S. relations. But you know, we talk about friends and enemies and somewhere in between a lot of times. When it comes to enemies, we shared this a couple of weeks ago, but we're in competition with the enemies a lot of times. And really what we're in competition is we want to be in control of our enemies, or control of our enemies' thoughts, or we want to make sure they know that we're right in this situation that we're arguing with them about, whether it's political, whether it's just about having some sort of location or boundary, or some sort of object that we own, some sort of materialistic idea. But Jesus came on the Sermon on the Mount, and he said in Luke 6:27-36, but to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do unto you. It's very interesting. There's so many different faiths, religions, and philosophies that use the golden rule, which shows up at the end of this verse from Jesus. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So the idea that golden rule is so universal in cultures. But the extreme difference in the golden rule shows up before this and what Jesus said, in the idea of if somebody slaps you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. You know, love your enemies is so different than the idea of just doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. So what I would ask you is, are you combatant towards others? You know, who in life are you combatant towards? Are you in competition with, or do you put as the other side of a war, if you will? So the other question I would ask you is, who are you in competition with related to yourself? Sometimes we're in competition with ourselves, and a competition with ourselves can turn out as something very positive. We can have a goal or a plan. You think of running a marathon or a half marathon or a race, and you have these goals and plans, so you have this competition inside yourself. Stephen Perrafonte, which was a long distance sprinter in the U.S. Olympics, said to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice your gift. And the idea that we're given a gift and to just try to be your best. And that's important, and it can help us drive who we are. Obviously, the idea of a marathon where everybody wins a trophy is a lot different than saying you're going to do a marathon where you're trying to become a gold medal a winner. But the potential problems with competition with yourself is when it comes to shame and pride. And I always like to put shame and pride together, because I don't believe shame and pride are much different from each other. It's different in how they look towards people, but it's the same as how they are towards you. It's always an identity crisis. Pride is an identity crisis. Shame is an identity crisis. We don't know who we are, and we don't understand who we are. So when it comes to shame and pride, a lot of times what we think of are these phrases that we put into our mind. In the terms of Yoda, Siths, they speak in absolutes, and you think of shame and pride, and a lot of times shame and pride are these absolutes that we say in our life. I think of people that have a hard time saying truth, because when they say truth, they have to add an absolute to the end of it. And as soon as you add an absolute to the end of most truths, it becomes a lie. And you think of somebody that says, well, I've been doing a really good job at doing a stream design. I'm the best stream designer ever. Well, maybe that's probably not the case if you're the best stream designer ever, but you can say I've been doing a good job at being a stream designer. You can say I'm the worst. I've really messed up a couple things in engineering design, and that may be true, and that's true. And then you say, well, I'm the worst engineer ever. Well, that's probably not the case, and that's probably a lie. There's been a lot of engineers out there. I think of this in my kids. It seems often in the day that Abby or I become either the worst mom or dad ever, or we become the best mom and dad ever. And neither of them are true. And the errors are when we actually define ourselves by these absolutes in shame or pride. So one of the things we think of in competition is we think of what our best is, and sometimes we don't think of the situation, we don't think of the gifts that we were given at the time. We think of our best as being in a different situation, opposed to our best as being the situation that we're in at this time. So the question I would say here is, are we combative towards ourselves? I mean, are you combative towards yourself in a sense that you can't get over this competition that you're having with yourself? And then the final one that I'll talk about today before we move on to the technical talk is, am I combative against God? When we're combative against God, a lot of times it's that we're trying to understand, do I value my understanding of God or of the universe or of anything more than a relationship with others in that situation, or even with God? Why, and a lot of times this comes in the form of questions. Why does a kind God allow hurt? Why does a kind God allow COVID-19? Why does a kind God allow this? And we find ourselves really struggling with these things, and we're more concerned about the fact that we understand all the aspects than that we love. And in relationships with others, we know that that's silly, because if we're blessed to be married or in a long-term relationship, and we think we're going to ever understand our spouse, that never happens. I've known Abby now for, what year is it now? 24 years. And we've been married for working on 21 years. I don't understand Abby. I love her dearly. If I thought I had to understand her before I could love her, my life would be miserable. I'd be stuck in competition and comparison, and I wouldn't be able to have joy in my life. because I'd be stuck trying to think I have to understand this person before I can love them. Now, I love the parts that I can see, understand about aspects of my spouse, but for me to think I could ever understand my spouse is insane. Brad, you've been married for a long time. George Kelly, you've been married for a long time. I'm I'm guessing you guys don't quite have your spouses completely understood yet either. Um, so, um, so in understanding God, who's so much bigger than our spouse, sometimes we really want to understand God because it hurts us when we don't understand uh, why He would allow things. And the final question here related to understanding God is: do I have to understand God to love God? You know, are we living as a combatant towards God in our life? Um, I think it's important whether you're not sure exactly if there is a God or not in this world, or if you're positive there is a God. There's no reason to live as a combatant towards that God. If you think there might be some sort of bigger, higher being out there, but you're not sure if it wants to have a relationship with us, to be combatant towards that would be crazy. If it's a bigger, higher being than us, if it doesn't exist, then to be combatant towards it is kind of crazy. It doesn't exist. And if you think it does, that God is out there and wants to have a relationship with us, and to be combatant towards it is never going to draw you into relationship with somebody. If I was combatant towards my wife, it's not going to pull me towards a relationship with my wife. It's going to draw me towards a divorce from my wife. Um, so, in speaking about combatants, there's a timely quote that came up this weekend uh, that I'd like to share with you from George W. Bush. And this is talking about the current circumstances, but it could be talking about any circumstance, I think. And it said, "We are not partisan combatants. We are human beings. We are equally vulnerable. So that means we have our own faults. We have our own things that aren't perfect, and we are equally wonderful in the sight of God. Uh, we rise or fall together. So as our relationships are together, we can bring people up and we can tear people down together." Um, I'm not going to be one that jumps out and says George W. Bush was the best president, or I wish George W. Bush was the president right now, but I can tell you that it was a pretty timely quote to see George W. Bush say this, and it was appreciated. So, in closing comments here before we move on, just a couple of questions, and these are my questions I had on my heart this morning. Do I believe there's a unique purpose and plan for my life? If I believe there's a unique purpose and plan for my life, it tears down some of the competition in my life. Um, does God want me to live obedient? And do I believe God wants me to live obedient according to His calling, for His gifts and His relationships, experiences He gives me? And do I believe that that's not the same gifts and experiences that He gave Billy Graham, that He gave Lando, that He gave Han Solo, that He gave George W. Bush, that He gave Mother Teresa, that He gave somebody else, that He gave you, but that it's unique to me, and that He's going to have details that are unique to my life? And the final question and challenge for this week before we move on is: do I desire to choose competition, love, or do I want to try to choose both for this week? And that's kind of a question for you. I don't know if it's possible to choose both competition and love. Maybe it is. I've seen some people that were in fierce competition, what seemed to be competition, that seemed to love people dearly and things. But what do I choose for this week? So with that thought, I'll open it up to any comments or anybody that wants to add anything, and then we're going to move on. Greg's going to talk to us about some things he's been investigating in QGIS this week related to finding watersheds for small catchments, drainage areas, and other things. So. Thanks, Brad. All right. We'll close in a quick prayer here, and then we'll move on to the technical aspects. Dear God, I pray that you allow us to be broken this week. I pray that you allow us to not have everything that we desire come to us, but that we can look at the things that are truly important in our lives, that we can rest on the fact that you're good, that we can look at other people, find ways to love them and live with them uh, in ways of encouragement opposed to in competition. We're thankful for these experiences. We're thankful that you have a plan and purpose for each one of our lives that's so uniquely different. Uh, and we praise you for being able to be so creative, to have such a unique plan for each one of us. We thank you, and we're thankful. Amen. All right.